we are not talking about intolerant at that histamine from food, and we only talk about this thing, histamine from food is something bad. No, not at all. In fact, histamine in food is a natural substance that occurs in many, many, many forms. In most cases, for example, cheese, histamine is the flavor carrier, which means if you take out the histamine from cheese, which you could do in a laboratory, we did that actually, we tried that. So you take it out, it still looks like cheese, but if you taste it, it tastes like cardboard paper because any kind of taste is gone. So in most cases, this histamine is actually a very important part of it. What the problem is that the person who is suffering from histamine intolerance is actually suffering from an enzyme deficiency.
You're listening to the Nutrition World Podcast, a show about navigating the intricacies of holistic wellness. We're a natural health food store located in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we believe that optimal health and peak performance should be accessible to everyone. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Brian Strickland. I'm the producer of the show. And on today's episode, we're speaking with a gentleman from Austria, and his name is Helmut Schmutz. Helmut is the formulator of a product called DAO. And if you're not familiar with DAO, you're probably not alone, but it is specifically targeted at histamines within the gut. If you didn't know, there are foods that contain histamines, some that are higher than others, and there are foods that can actually liberate histamines when we eat them. So Helmut really just wants to walk us through what this means for people, and if it's left unchecked, how it can result in a variety of different systems. So we have a lot of ground to cover. This is a really interesting conversation on a relatively new product, but we hope that you enjoy this conversation between Ed and Helmut.
Today, I am so intrigued by the upcoming conversation. This is going to be unlike almost anything that I've actually ever had an experience with because, and I'm going to ramble a couple minutes here. You know, I've heard for almost 43 years now, dozens of people a day, because I deal with a lot of clients, a lot of people who struggle with their health, and I've heard everything. I don't think there's a story I have not heard, but there's a category of people who are suffering in this country that actually don't need to be suffering. And it has to do with histamines and a type of allergy histamine reaction that doesn't cause the body to have a reaction like an IG reaction, but just causes terrible symptoms. And, you know, I was thinking just minutes before I started this podcast, I've watched medicine, I've watched nutrition, I've watched people for 4+ decades. In my whole life, there's only been, and maybe somebody will call me out on this, one single drug that has been invented that cured anything, and that was hepatitis C. That drug can cure people. Everything else that's been invented is tweaking the normal system of managing, helping people feel better. There's not a real, there's no super life-changing pills that came out, I guess I will say, or treatments. But I can tell you today's going to be potentially life-changing, because when I started learning about this whole conversation of histamines and what can we do about it beyond just staying away from the foods, we have an option that is so powerful and so dramatic and so quick that I'm just continued to be excited about this. So today, we're probably talking to the person the furthest distance away we've ever done on a podcast, and it's Helmut Schmutz from Austria. Welcome, Helmut, to Nutrition World's podcast.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to meet you today. Thank you very much.
I have talked to Helmut once or twice before, and I'm just supremely impressed. And what we're going to learn today is, what is this histamine conversation? Why is it important to address, and what can we do about it? Because Helmut has more experience than any person in the world. He started looking into this 20 years ago about why do we have histamine overabundance? What can we do about it? And so, Helmut, I guess let's start, because I always tend to assume people know these things more just because I studied all day long doesn't mean anybody else does. What is a histamine, and why should we even be wanting to learn about this?
Thank you for the introduction. I'm really flattered. I wouldn't call myself the only person who knows, but I've got some experience now after those 20 years. When we first started 20 years ago, my scientific team and myself, we just tried to find out whether there is a second possibility besides allergies. Everybody knows about allergies. Everybody knows the tricky thing with IgE reaction. You react to histamine outburst in your own body, which causes all the symptoms that we all know. Besides this, there was a group of persons that had those symptoms, but simply could not be tested IgE positive. So they went to the allergologist. They went through the full screen. The allergologist did not find anything. So they were all really disappointed, went home and thought, okay, maybe I've got some other problem, but nobody knows about it. So we tried to do, and it took us really quite some time to make the big difference. Nowadays, we can say, we talk about something actually very simple. If we talk about histamine intolerance, we are not talking about intolerant at that histamine from food, and we only talk about this thing, histamine from food, is something bad. No, not at all. In fact, histamine in food is a natural substance that occurs in many, many, many forms. In most cases, for example, cheese, histamine is the flavor carrier, which means if you take out the histamine from cheese, which you could do in a laboratory, we did that actually, we tried that. So you take it out, it still looks like cheese, but if you taste it, it tastes like cardboard paper because any kind of taste is gone. So in most cases, this histamine is actually a very important part of the food. What the problem is that the person who is suffering from histamine intolerance is actually suffering from an enzyme deficiency. To digest histamine in our body, we naturally produce a certain enzyme, which is called diamine oxidase, or in short, DAO. And this DAO is produced in our small intestine as a natural barrier, a natural shield against an overload of histamine from food. So normally, if you have an abnormal amount of DAO in your body, in your small intestine, you can eat histamine-rich food without any problem, because the histamine that comes down there is naturally digested and split up. So you don't have any problem with that.
That is so interesting. And again, the analogy that I speak probably too much, people may get tired of it, is that of an orchestra. And I feel so connected to that theory that our human body is like a massive orchestra. So we imagine all these musicians and instruments, and as long as everything's tuned up and playing in tune, you're going to produce most likely beautiful music. But when one or more of those instruments or musicians completely is out of tune, the rest of them can't really balance it because it's rippling's effect on that music. Well, this is what happens on so many systems of our body. We have substances like a histamine or 1,000 substances that in the right amount is producing the optimal health music. But if it's too high or too low, then it sends these ripple effects out. What are some of the effects people will feel if they, one, don't have enough DAO to help to manage histamine and their histamine levels rise too high? What are the most common symptoms?
Actually, this was the biggest challenge at the beginning because those symptoms can be really widespread. We start from headache down to diarrhea, down to bloating, down to itching. Some people even get skin rashes from histamine. So we talk about a whole range of symptoms that can occur if you have this problem.
Well, that, and as anyone who is a counselor or a healthcare person or physician has a category of clients and patients that they hear all these types of complaints about, and they actually may test and try medications or they try different dietary changes, but there's still a big gap in regard to some conversations. And I think one of the biggest ones is on this histamine. And the wonderful thing that we're going to talk about is the remedy of choice, which is totally natural. We're not treating medical conditions, but we're helping to manage health, can not only give you a clue, is this your true issue or not? And if it is, it's an easy fix. It's just an easy fix. Now, I do want to say real quickly, what are some of the foods other than cheese that might produce a pretty good hefty load of histamines? I know red wine is one, isn't it?
Exactly. That's absolutely true. And with red wine, again, I can give you a very interesting example. We tested several red wines from the same vineyard from different years, and we found out that The same vineyard, the same wine, the same grape produced in 1 year a high amount of histamine. Next year, almost none.
Really?
So, and that's actually the tricky thing about it. And that's the tricky thing also with the diet. I always recommend diet as the first thing you really could do about a histamine intolerance. Leave out those foods that you can't take. It's always easily said, because if you have to take out tomatoes, if you have to take out cheese, if you have to take out raspberries, beans, chocolate, sausages, anchovy, sauerkraut can be left out easily. Mm-hmm. Avocado, banana, ananas, pineapple, walnut, tomato, plum, avocado. So we talked about a whole list of foods. And the trickiest thing is there is no marking on the food that tells you, okay, there is histamine in there or not. Histamine is actually coming out of fermentation processes. So the more the food is fermented, or let's say the other way around, the less fresh the food is, the higher the probability that there is histamine in it. It's, as I said, it's a natural substance that comes from any kind of fermentation process in food. That's why I can quote one specific food, which is the Thai fish sauce. If you ever went for Thai food, there is one special ingredient in there. It's in almost any kind of Thai food, and this is fish sauce. This fish sauce, which is tasting wonderfully, it smells terrible. Why does it smell so terrible? Because it's actually made from rotten fish. And as I always bring this as an example, if you want to kill somebody with a histamine intolerance, you really give him some fish sauce from Thailand, because that's an amount of histamine you cannot imagine. It's 1,000-fold of the normal amounts, which is absolutely natural, because if you let fish rot and then process it into some sauce, which doesn't harm you at all if you are healthy. Mm-hmm. It's really good. And I had it many, many times in my life. I don't want to be misunderstood. There's nothing dangerous. But if you have a problem on this side, that is really a trigger. So if you want to test it, buy some Thai fish sauce.
That is such an interesting story. And I know I just actually a few months ago, we did a podcast on me rating the alcohols from worst to best. And I know part of it is my studies, part of it is my life journey. And in regard to like red wine, I drank red wine because, it's been very well marketed as almost a health food, which is a joke. And so, but I always for those years couldn't really figure out why I didn't feel sick, but I didn't feel well. And I felt foggy thinking. I felt a little congested. I felt a little druggy, dragged out. And it was a consistent feeling. And I should have had the light go off, say, there's something about this red wine, and finally it did. And of course, I rate more of the cleaner alcohols that have less of that, like tequila and a few others. But as far as people, they can journey their whole life, like almost all of us, and never get this connection. So what I want to talk about, or ask you the question, Helmut, at this point is, and one, I want to make a point that I think you've already made. Histamines are not a bad guy. They are important for some functions of our body. This isn't like traditional medicine seems to always put things in good and bad categories. It isn't that. It's the mismanagement of our body due to all the other reasons. And of course, some of those reasons that we can't produce DAO is Roundup in food. The microbiome is messed up. A lot of the drugs like Enbrel and a few non-steroidal anti-inflammatories and some of the Prilosec, all those decrease DAO. So we're kind of doing it sometimes to ourselves. But as far as this DAO, it's a supplement, it's a capsule. And when I actually experienced the first use of it, I was told, give it 2 or 3 days, do it before each meal. And if you see dramatic changes, well, you obviously need to manage your DAO better. And it was, and I've talked to a couple dozen people since then. It is absolutely almost a black and white conclusion. If you have it, then you're going to know that this product's going to work. So explain this DAO product.
You're absolutely right. You made the biggest points already. When we originally found out the problem of histamine intolerance, we went the next step and said, okay, now we know the problem, which is this enzyme deficiency. How can we solve it? Easiest solution, and we wanted to come up with a very easy solution because we talk about a patient group that has a lot of digestive problems already. So we did not want to come up, with those moon reacting, whatever kind of supplements that have a chemical pathway of 2 kilometers, just to be understood. We wanted to have something really simple. So we tried to find DEO, and we originally found it. This DEO that we are using today is from a natural source. It's absolutely clean. There's nothing added to it. It's just as it is. It's like the DEO we are producing in our body today. The only thing is, and that's what made it really difficult in the beginning to bring it into a product, was that this diamino oxidase, this enzyme, is very, very sensitive to all kinds of, let's say, surrounding mechanisms like heat, like acidity, like all those things. So we had to find a very specific formulation for that. And one of it is the enteric coating that is absolutely necessary with the DEO to make it function in your body. If you don't have it enteric coated, you won't have any reaction at all, because your stomach is going to kill the enzyme, which is a natural barrier. So we found that, and nowadays we can say we have a very reliable product. And as you mentioned already, the very interesting thing about our product is you have an immediate effect. So in comparison to many other supplements on the market, which you have to take for weeks or even months to get gradually better, here you have a product that gives you instant relief. If you take the product and you are sensitive to histamine because you're suffering from an histamine intolerance, you will not have any problem afterwards. And that's really something I'm very proud of, that we really managed to get that. The most important thing is, and that is something you have to keep in mind all the time when you take DEO, you have to take it before the food. That's a very important thing. So you can't get any relief after you had the dinner. So going out, having dinner and coming home and say, oh, I forgot the DEO is bad, but you can't solve it by throwing in 2 more afterwards. It has to be in place when the food gets into the intestine, so you have to take it before.
So when I was learning about it, it lasts about 6 hours with each dose. Is that correct?
Correct. Absolutely correct. This is also something, DEO, and as I said, it's the natural DEO, is being transported through the intestine with the natural flow of your food. So if you look at the time span that your food takes through your body, that's about that time span. And since we become part of the food in your intestine, so it's nothing that is clinging onto your intestinal walls, it's just going with it. And that's very important that it moves with the food, because through the whole intestinal mucosa, we try to bring down the histamine load as much as possible. And that's why we have those 6 hours.
How so interesting to me. Of course, I've been a lifelong detective and a seeker of these kind of anything that has to do with helping optimizing health, because we're in a declining state in this country. And I think the norm has become, if you're normal today, you're overweight, you're anxious, you're a little depressed, you're kind of fatigued half the time, you have swellings, you have, you snore at night, you blank. I mean, we could fill a page. That's the norm today. That did not be the way the world was when I was born in 57. And, in the 60s, I remember being around families, even the 70s. But something, we're corrupting our own health many times, not directly meaning to, but the experiences and exposures we have are creating, again, it's making those musicians in that orchestra either go to sleep or get completely out of tune, and then that's rippling down many different levels. And of course, what happens at the very end of that path is disease. And we have a huge opportunity to sideline that disease if we can be learning what we need to do at this stage. And, when the yellow flags eventually turn to red flags, we can prevent most of those. And this is one of those things also, because discomfort alone is going to probably make us have less energy, more anxiety, more this, more that, just because we're feeling puffy and we're feeling like we're swelling. And then we have these multiple, you've already mentioned probably 12 symptoms, and I'm sure there's even more from histamines. So I have to repeat, in 42 years of watching a lot of medical stuff and, of course, living in the whole world of nutrition, you're right. We do a nutritional supplement. It may take many months and maybe even a couple years to prove that this is actually working. because not everything do we feel directly. Like, if we raise certain levels of NAD for anti-aging, you may not feel that, but maybe your cells are getting younger in some ways, but that's not real easy to design or to define. But this is. And I've already told a number of people who came in with these vague symptoms of, I never feel well. And they kind of hit upon the swellings. And I said, you know what? Just try this DAO for 3 days. I want you to take one pill, again, before meals. I guess if a person was eating in a modest window, they could get by with 2 pills, one in the morning, and then hit the other one before the next 2 meals or before the next meal. Now, real quickly, is this a vegetarian product?
It's not a vegetarian product. I'm very open with that. It's actually made out of pig kidney.
Okay.
I mean, why is that so? I can give you a very, very simple explanation for that as well. First of all, pig is genetically very close to the human being. I mean, we all deny that, especially we men, but it is as it is. And apart from that, pigs are nourishing very similar to us, which means they take everything from vegetables to meat to whatever they can get. We take much higher qualities, but still we have this mixture. So we had to find a species that is very close to that. And apart from that, I want to stress another point. The product that we are selling right now is having no systemic effect. It has only a local effect in the gut on the food itself. This was also something that we definitely were pinpointing at the beginning of our studies and experiments, because as you mentioned already, we talk about a patient that is having problems already with this intestinal system. So, and as you said already, there are so many parameters in there that are really causing troubles. We did not want to interfere with these. We wanted to soothe the whole situation. We wanted to calm the intestine, which is, in our opinion, one of the most important things in that connection. So our product is only working in the small intestine. Within that, it's not absorbed. The DAO that we are producing there is not absorbed into the body. So it stays there and it keeps the whole body clean. This is something that we definitely wanted to have.
Well, thank you for that, because, there's certain people who may choose not to do it for that reason. But I feel totally confident, one, in the quality of the product, the purity of the product, because I know we've talked about that. And there are certain things that just can't be replaced from the plant kingdom because plants don't make this enzyme, do they?
Exactly. That's correct. There is one way of extracting the DAO from plants, which comes from peas. But, and there's the big problem, you need tons of peas to get milligrams of DAO out there, first of all. And apart from that, you have those cross allergies with peas, which is a very, very big problem, actually, in many cases, if you extract peas. So we were definitely going for that. It's much easier, it's much cleaner. All those pigs are coming from absolutely biologic background, so we can trace it back to each pig. Each capsule can be traced back to a pig. We are fully safe. We are undergoing the full European safety regulations here, which are very, very tough. Mm-hmm. We cannot escape anything, and we don't want to escape anything because we know that we are producing a product that is actually taken by the patient, and we want to keep the patient as safe as possible. We did all kinds of toxicological studies. Everything has been done. So we are talking about a product that is really having a very, very high scientific background. There were scientific studies made, double-blind crossover studies with the product, which is much more than you can expect from a classic food supplement. All that has been done within the last 20 years. And I'm really proud to say the product that you get now in the United States of America is for sure one of the safest and most effective one that you can get anywhere in the world.
I love that. And people, I want you to know that, the European standards are far higher than the United States. I completely have total trust in this. I've looked deep enough in it because if I put my reputation on the line, it's very important to me, and I'm not going to endorse something that I would have any questions about. I just am thrilled because, and even though we've mentioned these symptoms, I think histamines, and I think you probably would say I'm right, the normal list may be 15 things, but there's no telling what an individual can experience with too many histamines. And to experiment with this product, if you have vague symptoms that nothing else has been able to modulate in any way, you've tried all the different diets, you've taken the supplements, you've taken prescription drugs, you're still feeling this level of not healthy in many regards, I recommend at least do the small 3-day trial of DAO. It can't hurt you. And I'm used, legally, maybe I don't want to say anything out of line, but this is a diagnostic by taking those 3 days. That's the test to see.
Right.
And what I'm doing is I really don't feel like I have a lot of problem with histamines unless I eat something or drink something of very strong substance. I won't drink red wine anymore. But, if I were going to eat chocolate or I was going to eat, like avocados is the one food I eat very regularly. And I did not know avocados had histamines until you started teaching me about this. So I'd take them before some of those meals, and I don't take them other times because overall I'm pretty darn good. But Helmut, this is so, I think, life-changing for some people who've been struggling. Now, age-wise, what is the youngest that a person can consume this?
Naturally speaking, we can say the older you get, the higher the probability of having histamine problems. So normally it starts around the age of 20. Mm. It also comes from the fact that until then, you normally have a very, let's say, controlled diet. After that, you start eating and drinking all kinds of things. So also the probability that you get food with higher histamine levels is higher. And so we would say, yes, from 20 up to, actually, there's no upper limit. We see a very big group between 40 and 60. Where a lot of enzymes in your body are stopped, are not produced anymore. So this plays together. We see cross reactions, a lot of cross reactions with lactose intolerance and fructose intolerance. Also, those two are always interplayers with the histamine intolerant thing. So you have quite a lot of reasons why you can get that. I mean, if you talk, and you talked about the food already, we are not only talking about biogenic amines or histamine in food that is originally there, we also talk about so-called unspecific liberators of histamine, where the food itself doesn't carry any histamine, like strawberries. Strawberries is a very, very good example for that. Strawberries almost never carry histamine with themselves, but due to their reaction in the small intestine, the intestine produces so much histamine that it could be that you can't take that. So we call it a liberator of histamine. Mm. Citric fruits fall into that category. Crustaceans, eggs, and aged white wine. Aged white wine also normally doesn't carry a lot of histamine, but this can cause the same reaction in your intestine by just producing too much histamine there locally. So as you said already, the chances that you have something with histamine are quite high. And then everything depends on whether you have enough DAO in your body or not.
And now we know how to determine it and what we can do about it. Last question, pregnancy and breastfeeding.
What I can say is, as I said before, since our product does not have any systemic action at all, we can recommend it for any of those situations. Honestly speaking, there were no clinical studies done on that, but since we don't have any systemic action, I would say there is no problem at all.
And logically, if we are simply trying to replace something that normally is within the system, it has a much higher level of safety. We're not taking a foreign compound. I mean, like I take hawthorn berry for my heart. Well, my body doesn't make hawthorn berry. It is an outside substance. Is it safe? Well, yeah, it's safe for me, but it would need to be a little higher standard of determining that for people who had risk or breastfeeding. Replacing what you already had at 20 years old is just freaking nature's common sense. So I certainly would feel good about that. Well, Helmut, this has been, I think it's going to be life-changing for a number of people. And you are entering a market that is modestly, well, it's all new. It's a little complex. Most people have no idea. Of course, they won't. And even if they had a little idea, they don't have the full picture of how do we do this? How do we make it work? You've given that to people. And my goal in life is to empower people with solid ethical information because they're not getting it from mainstream or traditional sources because their toolbox is too small and they're in a broken system. They're in a system that works for part of their system and other parts with people who with chronic issues, it's simply not working. And I just think people like you are heroes. Here you are all the way across the world, and you've spent 2 decades researching something that can be life-changing for so many people. And I just I want to thank you for all of your ethics and your hard work, because I know this doesn't come easy. If people had any idea, and I don't have any idea, but I know enough to know you have turned backflips over and over and over and had many challenges that you could have quit. And here we are talking. So thank you so much, Helmut, for being a part of Nutrition World's podcast.
You're most welcome. I fully appreciate the possibility. Thank you very much, Ed.
And I love the view in the back, and it makes everyone calmer. And we probably will be talking to you again on another format in 6 months to a year. And maybe someday you can get over here to Tennessee, and we would be thrilled to have you in person.
I'd love to. I love Tennessee. I've been there twice already, and I'll definitely come back again.
All right, my friend. All right, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Yes, thank everyone for listening to our podcast. I wake up in the morning excited to be here, and I love the fact that we are teaching people how to take care of themselves. So join us for the many, many more of these coming down the road, and take care of yourself, and we're here to help anytime that we can. Thank you.